that,
Great.
there we go. I will turn it over to you.
Recording in progress. That always just scares the dickens out of me because I never quite know. Now what am I supposed to do? Recording
the same
in
thing
progress.
you were doing if it wasn't recorded.
It's almost better that you don't tell me, I suppose. It seems like we will be joined by other folks along the way, but we should not dishonor the recording that is in progress. So let me say that, in the words of a very thoughtful scholar who has done work in this area before, doors have soul. I repeat it and I believe it. More than repeat it, I believe it. Doors have soul. For me, that means a certain kind of animation that's possible with doors, and we get to see that almost immediately. And it means that doors have multiple functions as images and imagination in Judaism. Some of them are well documented, some of them less documented. Some of them have to do with Jewish rituals like Elijah at the door, let's say, and certain rituals that would take place at the door to the temple in Jerusalem or to the Mishkan, the wandering sanctuary of the wilderness. Some of them have to do with our interpretation of scripture and the way in which we see and value and place our heroes, like Elijah the prophet, whom we tend to place at doorways more often than not. That's where Elijah does his best work. Sometimes in the worlds of Jewish philosophy, we find the door, and especially the mezuzah, fixed to the part of the door that is neither in nor out. We find that in the philosophy of Maimonides in the early Middle Ages. Maimonides says, be especially scrupulous when it comes to the mezuzah, because when you touch the mezuzah, you are coming in contact with the oneness of the world, where there is no in and out, where meaning slides this way and also that. There are lots of ways in which the door and the threshold function in our own society too. Here again, I repeat just a little bit of what I said when we met last time. The threshold has become more than itself for us, because you have your pain threshold and I have mine. You have your emotional threshold and I have mine. Each one of us has a threshold of imagination. So we can use that word in multiple ways. We can use doors to connect space, and we do, to connect space or to divide space. It keeps our images, our imagination, and our programs multiple in meaning. If we need to join the dining room and the living space or the family room, and we have the French doors or the swinging doors to open and connect the spaces, we have one big room. When we want to close ourselves off in the intimacy of a study or a bedroom, we are able to do that as well. When we go in search of something like a pad or a pen or a pair of glasses, and along the way we forget what we're looking for, it usually comes after we've passed through into another room. Let's see, why did I come into this room again? Can I just remind myself somehow of why it is that I entered this room? And then it comes back to us, or sometimes we really have to leave the room and then come back. The door has somehow mediated the space between in and out, both Jewishly and also not, also in the broader sense of culture. So we're going to explore a number of different texts and a number of different ways of thinking about doors as entrances and exits to and from various parts of our lives, animating the door so that in some way the door looks like me at my best self. At least that's what Rabbi Elazar HaKapar of the 3rd century will tell us. Sometimes the door represents for us God's entrance into the world and our deepest self that can be revealed. Maybe that feels a little bit like Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Sometimes right in the middle, we'll find that a great modern Jerusalem poet will tell us, take a good look at the door and see what parts of it have been pressed, knocked upon, hit before, knocked upon. Where does opportunity actually knock, and how does it affect us? Those are three ways in which we will look at doors and doorways and thresholds from the perspective of Jewish culture, Jewish life, Jewish images and imagination this evening. And we can make a beginning. We can look at a text. Why don't we do that? We can look at our first text. Be like a threshold. Do you see it? Thank you, Rabbi Citron. Rabbi Elazar HaKapar said, do not be like a lintel overhead that no one can reach. Neither be like a door beam that injures faces, nor like a raised threshold that bruises feet. Rather, be like a low threshold that everyone crosses easily. In the end, the entire building might disappear, but the threshold will remain in place. Let me stop for a moment to celebrate, to say Baruch Hatov v'Hametiv, blessed is the one who is good and makes for good, a bracha that we recite over good news. I had cataract surgery the other day. And now, just several days later, I can read what on my computer looks like a very small font, like the 10 or 11. And there's no way that I could have seen that. It's fine. It was fine the right way. Thank you, Rabbi. But I could never have seen it. Wow, this is just extraordinary. And there's another eye coming. I assume things will get better and better. But I am happy to celebrate with the bracha, the repair of one eye. Well, back to the text. Pardon the personal greeting card that I sent myself. Rabbi Elazar HaKapar said, I read it again, do not be like a lintel overhead that no one can reach. Neither be like a door beam that injures faces, nor like a raised threshold that bruises feet. Rather, be like a low threshold that everyone crosses easily. In the end, the entire building might disappear, but the threshold will remain in place. A lintel that no one can reach? Well, the lintel of crosses, of course, is the cross piece that goes over the two uprights, which are called mezuzot. We think of mezuzah as being not the entire upright on which the door lintel is poised, or a brace of them on which the door lintel is poised. We think of a mezuzah as being a small element, a part for whole, that we put on the doorpost. But in the Bible and in the ancient world, the mezuzah was in fact that upright. Two uprights and a cross piece called a lintel. I imagine that Rabbi Elazar HaKapar was a teacher. I know he was a teacher. And that he had this kind of meditation, perhaps standing by his door, like I've seen my daughter do as she greets her students in a small little school in the Golan Heights, in the northern part of Israel, on a ridge of the Golan Heights, sloping towards the south and down into the mainland of part of Israel itself. There, every morning she meets her students, and every morning she greets each one of them just at the lintel, just in the doorway, in the space that is neither in nor out. And there she gives each one of them a greeting. It moves me to think about the number of times and about the kinds of endless messages that I have heard her give to her students about what we did yesterday and the way in which you distinguished yourself. And what are the hopeful possibilities for today? And what kind of excitement? We have something planned today that I think will get your interest in particular, she might say to one or to another. In effect, tailoring each message for each and every student. It's a joy and a wonder to hear her do that. And there, I think she makes herself like Elazar HaKapar, some millennium and a half or more, millennium and 3/4 earlier than that, where he would stand by the door and animate the door, that somehow the door would become his best self, reminding himself in sculpted stone, in black basalt, Elazar, do not be like a lintel overhead that no one can reach. Don't be like a door beam that injures faces. This one a little bit more obscure, but let's imagine, if you will, a transom. Let's imagine posts, and on top of the posts, there is a lintel, a cross piece. And then in order to even it out or let in a little bit more air circulation, there are another couple of stubby uprights, and then on top of that, another lintel, all right, what we might call a transom, if it had glass in it, perhaps. You follow what I'm saying? So there are, in effect, 2 such lintels. Don't be like the one that's out of each, and don't be a door beam that injures faces. What do you think that means, that injures faces? Anybody feel like talking this evening? Let me invite you to do what we do best, which is develop conversations and share ideas.
I mean, if it was too low, it wasn't set, if it was set below 7 feet, then someone could hit it when they're trying to walk across underneath it.
Someone could hit it. Someone could bump right into it. Absolutely. If we were looking at the Hebrew of this text, James, that was you, right? Yeah.
Yes.
If we were looking at the Hebrew of this text, we would see, and not that injures faces, but that eats faces. Don't be like a cross beam that eats faces. That beam's going to just eat your face alive. You're going to turn around and you're going to smack into it, and it's not going to turn out well for you. It'll probably be okay for the basalt 500-pound piece of basalt that's been cut and dressed and properly fit, but it's not going to be so good for you. Don't be like that. How about don't be like the lintel that's out of reach? What's the pedagogic strategy there? What's the teacher after there? Reminding himself, reminding herself.
If the presentation is too dense and everyone's scratching their head, trying to figure out what the rabbi's saying.
It can seem absolutely and be quite literally too high to reach. This is over my head, quite literally. This is over my head. I can't do it. How many of us have either had students or been the student who just turns off after that, who just says, you know what, I can't do it. I can't get it. Why bother to even try? Don't be like that. Don't be like a lintel overhead that no one can reach. Rabbi Elazar exhorts himself in the presence of the lintel. Don't be like a lintel that no one can reach. Neither be like a door jamb that smacks you, a door beam that smacks you in the face. Nor like a raised threshold that bruises the feet. The last thing that I want, or one of the last things that I want in an education situation, is to be tripped up. I don't want to be fooled. I don't want to be misled. I don't want to be tricked in any kind of way, but it's possible. If I am raised just a little too high, then somebody might, over that threshold of meaning or that threshold of experience, someone could stub his toe, her toe, break something, certainly break stride, and fall flat on her face. Rather, be like a low threshold that everyone crosses easily. Ah. I must say, because the opportunity arises to say it, that I'm here at Lake Gaston with some very special friends. One of them is the greatest teacher that I ever had in rabbinical school, and his wife, who is close behind, although she was never a rabbinical school professor of mine, he was. And this is a teacher who always was the most modest and clear of thresholds. He was clear about where the threshold was, but also low-lying. Can you be both clear and also low-lying? Can you be distinct and also accessible? What do you think about that? Are there teachers who share that reality? Teachers whom you assess like that in your past? Yeah, James, anybody else? You think so? Nadine? Gonna take yourself off mute?
Yes, I definitely agree. And as a teacher myself from years past, the way to turn off your students or classes to be not accessible, to make things too technical sometimes, where they'll just turn you off because it's way over their heads. So it's always best to try to be straightforward.
What grade or subject do you teach?
Well, not anymore, but I taught elementary school, and 6th grade is where I taught mostly.
What an extraordinary opportunity and a very fine art to be able to offer a threshold to somebody over which that person can cross, especially at an age where, I don't know, puberty is blooming, where a conception of self and how one looks and how one dresses and how one speaks and the kinds of relationships that are fostered in a class where those things become more and more important to us. What a high art to make a low threshold that is also distinct. You can't be walked over. It can't be that terribly easy. It has to be distinct, but it also has to be accessible. Thank you for that. Congratulations on successfully negotiating and becoming that threshold. Anybody else? There are other people who are off camera whom I'm not seeing, so shout them out if you know them. Because I might not be seeing you. Just take a shot at it.
You are going to talk about this lintel since it looks quite extraordinary.
Yeah, I am going to talk about it. Yeah.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. Now, I also wanted to be clear what you were saying, because I've only known this mezuzah as a little piece of, well, wood or metal, mine is metal, on the right side of my door. Now, you're saying that in biblical times, this whole piece was considered the mezuzah, or which was considered?
The uprights, the two uprights.
The uprights that are holding the lintel.
Yes, yes. Like in Deuteronomy chapter 6, in the paragraph that we would call Ve'ahavta, if we were trying to speak about it and capture it in a Hebrew word. Yeah. All these things that I command you this day shall be in your heart. And ultimately you inscribe them on the mezuzot of your house and on your gates. Al mezuzot beitecha uvishe'arecha. Mezuzot in the plural. You imagine there's a custom that we don't seem to have, that seems reflected in the Hebrew, because we've figured out through the rabbinic interpretation that we only need to put an amulet, as it were, a capsule with those words within it on the right side of the door. But really, the Torah speaks about both sides of the door, shtei mezuzot, that there are two mezuzot, and they are the two uprights. And in Hebrew, well, Hebrew is a kind of photoshopped language that has at its root some Akkadian language from the other side of the Fertile Crescent, and some language that is just springing up brand new from the head and heart of the Hebrew writer. But there's a legacy of other languages. And the root of the word mezuzah might mean in Akkadian, hinged. It's the place, the sure place that doesn't move. But if you take it as coming from the Hebrew, it is precisely the place that moves, because zuz in Hebrew can mean moving. So what is it? Is it the place that moves or the place that doesn't move? And the answer is yes, depending upon what language you put your stock in, let's say. But the mezuzot are both of these uprights, both of these architectural elements, with a lintel that goes across them. And here we see a lintel that goes across them, a lintel that was discovered in the Golan Heights, that was, when it was discovered, if I'm remembering correctly, it was being used as a bench. It was I want to say that it was a bench by a bus stop, although I'm not sure that I'm remembering that accurately. You can probably Google it yourself and figure out whether I'm right or wrong about it. But a cut and dressed lintel like this, this would be extraordinary. How could you let this go to waste? Obviously, as used as a bench, it did not have this very fine relief of a sculpture available to it. It was probably all caked up and gridded up with centuries and centuries of ground just beneath the surface, unearthed and used and not particularly well examined. But once it was examined, they discovered that it was in fact a lintel. And not only that, but it was the lintel from the Beit Midrash, which is to say, a lintel from the study house of the same teacher who is cited right here, from the teacher Elazar HaKapar. What an extraordinary and ironic find. It is the only such architectural element ever found with writing on it that indicates that this was part of a building dedicated to a particular purpose for which the rabbis were famous, that is to say, the study workshop, the place where sages would come and where they would learn and hammer out Jewish procedures on the anvil of previous law and personal experience. So here it was, both as it appears in the Museum of the Golan, in the small town of Katzrin, just right next to City Hall, and also in a schematic that gives you a better idea of how this works, with some features that we can't quite get if we're looking at the stone in the original. We can see the two birds on either side. We can see how their beaks either become or are holding a great big elaborate and intertwined wreath. We can see how it is that that the circle within what seem to be two continuations of, I don't know, serpents or their tongues or something like that, contains some Hebrew words, with one Hebrew word on the outside of the circle to the right and one on the left side. On the right side, outside of the circle, you'll see Eliezer or El-Azar, Aleph Lamed Yud, Ayin Vav, Ayin Zayin Resh, Eliezer. On the other side, Hey Kof Pei Resh, HaKapar. And in the middle, Ze Beit Midrasho Shel LeRabbi. This is the midrash of the sage Elazar on the right, HaKapar on the left. What a beautiful, satisfying irony that the only such example of this kind of architectural institutional work that we have is from Elazar HaKapar, who in my imagination stands up strongly by the doorway and greets his students, much like my daughter greets her students even to this day. I want to be like the door through which I invite my students. There can be no difference. I am that which mediates between in and out. How about that feeling of mediating between in and out for you? Coming home from work, coming home from a basketball game, coming home from the grocery store, coming home from the art studio, whatever it is. What do you leave behind? What do you leave at the door? What, in a certain way, do you hang on the mezuzah as though it were a hook for your coat? And what do you take inside with you? How do you want to conduct yourself when you come home from work? Or for that matter, when you go to work? Is there some difference between inside and outside? And how have you found that to be modified during COVID? That's a lot to ask about, but here we are in this very timely place, in this really extraordinary arena where we get to think about what are the implications of our living experience on these ancient rituals and these ancient associations that are made with, well, it's a regular living device, isn't it? There's a doorway, there's inside, there's outside. Doors have soul, as Robert Sardello says, and mediating between inside and outside is an element of soul. But how does passing through the doorway, how does it change during COVID, unprecedented in our lifetimes? How does it change, or how has it changed you? Or how might it change you still, even to this day? Honoring in retrospect what COVID meant, or perhaps still means to you. What do you think?
Well, first I always think of a low threshold as much more welcoming You know, it's easy to come in, it's easy to cross over. But in the past, sometimes when you would cross over your nice low threshold, you could leave the outside world out there and maybe troubles and things that happen during the day, you can forget them and come home to some peace, family. But it's different in COVID. Even crossing over a threshold now does not sometimes empty your mind of troubles and of troubling thoughts. Even with family, you know, you're just, it's there because it's always in the back of your mind now.
In a way, though, during COVID, the mezuzah, not just the whole, I guess I'll think of the whole, but has more meaning to me. And I've actually taken the practice now of touching it, particularly when I come back home, and thanking God for getting me home safely in one piece. And I do that almost every time now when I come in. I actually will say that out loud, say, thank you, God, for getting me home safely. And then coming in. So I think during COVID particularly, it made me become more aware of the outside, which was dangerous with these viruses wherever we were going, to when we came home, now it's safe and it's our small sanctuary.
Thank you for that. Thank you for the wonderful example. And thank you also for saying almost every time, because it doesn't ring true that we do it every time. It does ring true that we can do it most of the time, or even some of the time, and maybe build a practice that conforms with something that is necessary for us, or we understand the utility of it, and we build it into a ritual. Another time I'll tell you about this, but when I was growing up, probably when you were growing up, at least for many of you, there was no such thing as a seatbelt in a car. And then all of a sudden there was, and then you were faced with the problem of remembering to buckle up. Before there were retractable seatbelts, and before there was a ding, 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 or before there was an automatic version, you know, whatever was tried in various ways to get us to put our seatbelt on, you just either put it on or else you didn't put it on. And I made up a bracha for myself, because I have a kind of ritually engaged neshama, I guess I would say. And I think about rituals, and it seemed like the right thing to do to protect myself. So I made a ritual out of it. And we have been helped along in that way with COVID because of the ways in which the pandemic has made itself so apparent and obviously terrifying. You can't go into a hospital room anymore. You have to be properly gowned and gloved. People are in there attended by strangers and not by family. The hospital room door has become a much more formidable obstacle than it was before. And just so our own houses. All of this feeding into what is a very, very ancient idea. Who shall pass and who shall not pass, and under what circumstances shall it be so? And what is it that protects you at the doorway and at the threshold? And should your door say, come in, this is a hospitable place and it's easy, or should your door say, don't even try to get in here. This is too hard a place to get into. You'll make too much noise. The door is too strong. You will not succeed. Which of those possibilities, or some combination of the two, is a problem that has perplexed architects from forever since until this very day? What's your front door supposed to look like? How's that supposed to work? So thanks for reinforcing the fact that our own circumstance makes it more possible for us to have, or to enjoy, to celebrate, to have a meaningful ritual moment than ever before. Not to take advantage of what somehow seems to be a feature of many a front door, if not most of our front doors. And I suggest that if you don't have a mezuzah on your front door, you might, in honor of the pandemic, you might want to put one on your front door. I mean, perhaps it's a way of achieving some kind of solidarity with a community that cares about front doors and about what's inside and what's outside. We've even had some people in other workshops on this particular kind of topic make a mezuzah that had a place in it for the Hero Israel passage. Write them on the doorposts of your house and upon your gates, and also had a bottle of hand sanitizer attached to it. That when you would reach up to touch the mezuzah, that you would be, you'd have an opportunity to clean your hands. Not an altogether bad idea. In fact, quite a good idea. So, here is the Beit Midrash of Elazar HaKapar, who wants so much to be, I think, like the mezuzah. Or rather, excuse me, like the doorway and like the threshold, such that he animates it.
Are you going to share with us the meaning of this knot that's around? I mean, before we go on, it's quite convoluted. Now, to me, it looks like a snake, the center part. Maybe you could tell us what this all means. I didn't know if you were planning to discuss this or not, but since
No, I wasn't.
As a scout, I can tell you that's a square knot.
Okay,
Thank you, Rob.
Strongest knot for joining two different ropes.
okay, thank you.
The
I'm
strongest.
not sure about the symbolism of it and where it comes from, but
Mhm.
that's what it is.
The strongest knot for joining two kinds of ropes. I love it. I did not know that. I don't know anything about the symbolism of it, but I do know who to ask, and I will. I don't know whether I don't know whether there are other kinds of relief sculptures like this. There aren't any on lintels that I know of. I'm pretty sure about. But maybe on a wall someplace, it may be that it's part of a common vocabulary of which I'm just unfamiliar. And is it, it looks like, at least in the case of the flying creature that might be a cherub, who knows, on the left-hand side, that this is something inside the mouth of, that the cherub is, or angel or flying thing is holding with the mouth. Whereas on the right side, it doesn't, it's seamless. It looks like it might be part of the mouth. And I don't know anything about that, but it is very interesting.
And what did the word say again? Could you read that one more time before you go on?
Sure, in the middle, Ze Beit Midrasho Shel Le Rabbi, and then on the right-hand side, Elazar, and on the left-hand side, HaKapar. It looks like a lamed at the end, but it's not. It's a resh with a little flourish on the top.
And the closest meaning again of these words? Ben?
Sure. This is the study house of
Saying this is the study house.
yes,
Okay.
of Rabbi Elazar HaKapar, which was, Kapar might have been the name of the village from which he hailed. Don't really know. It's pretty enigmatic. It's also a little strange to try to figure out how it is that this piece was found in the Golan when and made from Golan stone, when it doesn't seem like he lived or taught in the Golan, but proximate to that in the Upper Galilee. So who knows? There are a lot of mysteries still
Thank you.
attached to it. but
Okay.
it's a pretty interesting artifact after all. So walking into a house like this, I'm remembering that when I moved to Philadelphia, I was in rabbinical school, that the first time that my grandpa came to visit my house, that he stood outside. He's an old, elderly Polish gentleman who wore a suit most of the time and a tie, and he came to our house, and he stood outside the door. And before he came into the door, he took a velvet kippah out of his pocket and put it on his head, smoothed it down, and then he touched the mezuzah and kissed his fingers. And I saw that as being, I remember it like it was yesterday, and I gave it a lot of thought because it was a highly emotional and reverential act as far as I was concerned. But I didn't think much about it beyond that. But I believe the message that I got from it over years and years of thinking about doors and doorways and thresholds and entering space and changing the space and also changing myself or reorienting myself within the space was very touching. This was a holy space, the space where his oldest grandchild and his wife had taken up residence in a new city under new terms of engagement and going to rabbinical school, no less. And here he was able to celebrate that and able to enter that house. And he was not going to do it without putting on his yarmulke and without touching the mezuzah and bringing his fingers to his lips. So I'm remembering it like it was yesterday. How about the rest of you? Have you seen such things? People kissing the mezuzah, as it were, in that kind of way? And does it remind you of anything else?
My family always did that.
Your family always did.
Always. My grandmother, that's what you did. She, of course, was Orthodox, but you touch the mezuzah and then you kiss your hand. And that's what she taught us to do.
Yeah, Annette?
Yeah, my father did the same thing. He was raised Orthodox also. He always kissed the mezuzah.
In the same kind of way?
Yes,
Hands to mouth?
yes.
Yeah. And it made its impression, obviously. You remember it. Anybody else? It was
I was just telling Stan that my grandmother also said that if, God forbid, you should drop a siddur, you need to pick it up and you need to kiss it like you would a mezuzah. Bring it to your mouth and kiss the book.
Yeah. So how do we
Thank you for sharing that. I did not know that.
valuing these things in a particular way with a particular kind of custom? That's very interesting. I hadn't thought about connecting the two of them. You know that the mezuzah, that the text that's written inside the mezuzah, whether it's written by hand, which is the traditional form of it, or whether it's printed in some other way by machine or whatever it might be, that the script always imitates. It's the same script as is used for writing a Torah scroll. That it's supposed to look like a Torah scroll and that you treat it like a Torah scroll. This is very serious. And remember again, Maimonides saying, there you are in the space that is one. There is no inside and outside. There is space that is one. So this was Rabbi Elazar HaKapar, the custodian of the space that moves from one side to the next. Maybe we can look at what comes next, at a poem by the 20th century, 21st century poet and friend of mine, Rivka Miriam. That's going to require somebody scooting us down the page, I suppose, which would probably be Rabbi Citron. Unless we can do it on our own. Can we do that?
To do that, I think she has to be the turn the page over.
Ah, and
There
so
she
she
is.
does.
Thank
So
you, Beth.
she does. Well, here we have it. Hamakom hahu. That place, a little bit above the latch and to the left, no one has ever touched, nor will anyone ever touch it. The hidden place on which no one has placed a hand. The place that does not know how to ask. That's her poem. She, like Rabbi Elazar HaKapar, is scrutinizing the door for something. She's looking for certain kind of evidence. I would say she's looking for evidence where the door has actually been touched. I remember as a child just loving the parts on after a snowfall in the Washington, D.C. area where I grew up, which seems to be more substantial and for the most part than snowfalls these days in the Washington, D.C. area. But the part of the snowfall that I really, really, really loved was the part that would remain pristine as long as possible. Did you share that? The part that was not touched, the part that wasn't trodden down and that wasn't plowed up and that wasn't moved aside to clear the path for the sidewalk or whatever it was, or that hadn't been somehow defiled by a dog. You know, the part that was that looked like, oh, snow that was undisturbed. I loved that. And they were always small little wedges of the snow in the corner that come out in the shady part and the darker, colder parts of the shadow of the house, the parts that were in which we didn't play as kids, or nobody thought to roll the snowball or to disturb the snow. And it was a prize to actually think about, here in this place, the snow has been undisturbed. How extraordinary. So I think about that when I read this poem. And when I look at the door, which is actually the front door to Rivka Miriam's home, I was visiting her one day and I decided that with this poem in mind that I ought to have a picture of her front door. It just seemed right to have a picture of her front door. So now you have a picture of the poet Rivka Miriam's front door. But more important than that, I wonder what you think about this poem. An inquiry into what? What's she talking about, or what might she be talking about? What's her interest? That place. No, a little bit above the latch and to the left. No one has ever touched, nor will anyone ever touch it. The hidden place on which no one has placed a hand. The place that does not know how to ask. Does any part of that poem sound familiar to you? Or ring a bell? How about the place that does not know how to ask? What do you think? Does anything there grab you? The Torah speaks about 4 children, one who is wise and one who is wicked, and one who is naive, and one who does not know how to ask. It's the only thing that comes to me. I could see Nadine mouthing it, maybe a couple of other people as well.
Well, when you started to say that, I said to Stan, I am one of 4 kids. And when you read that in the Passover Seder, we used to attribute which one of the 4 of us was one of those 4 qualities. Very interesting that you should say that, because now that it brought back memories.
And which one were you?
I was definitely not the one that wasn't afraid to ask. Definitely that wasn't me.
She must have been the wise one.
Yeah, she must have been the wise
We used to attribute that to the brother, the 3rd one of us, the first of the 2 boys, was always afraid to ask. Yes, he didn't like that very much, but that's what we used to call him.
Any other voices, Candy or Michael or Sabina or Cindy, Ginny rather, excuse me. New voices. Which one were you?
I'm afraid to say the mischievous one.
Don't be afraid to say it. That's an important one to be. They're actually all very important ones to be, and we could spend a lot of time talking about that. That's not where Rivka wants us to pay our entrance fee, so to speak, but rather at the front door. She's looking for something. I think she's looking for evidence of a spot that hasn't been touched. And just like me with the snow, or perhaps looking to see if the surface of this glass table or the kitchen counter or the cabinetry has been properly cleaned, to get down and look at it from another angle, you know, to see the sun reflected from in a different way. Can we see that? Can we discern, oh, this hasn't been cleaned. This hasn't been touched. It remains untrafficked. That's what she's looking for. No one has ever touched it, nor is anyone likely to touch it. In my mind's eye, I'm seeing her scrutinizing the door and looking to see where the lacquer, where the varnish has been removed or scuffed up or something like that. And there's a place on the door that has never been touched. To what end? Why does she care about that? Hamakom hahu. If you're a Hebrew reader, you can follow it. If not, I'll just show you where it is. The word hamakom appears the first word in the first line, the first word in the 4th line, and the first word in the 5th line. It's the word that appears most in the whole poem. And hamakom in Hebrew, oh, this is a subject for another time. If you're interested, we can talk about it. But hamakom becomes a word that means God. It becomes a name for God, especially after the destruction of the temple. If the temple was the place to which sacrifices needed to come, and the place over which the priesthood presided most prominently, especially for national rituals, once the temple was destroyed, there was no place. And so it and the God who presided over it became every place. And God became known as Hamakom, the place. And you can't even in Hebrew today, you can't really even say place without thinking about God. It always has somehow the resonance of God about it. That place, a bit above the latch and to the left, no one has ever touched, nor will anyone ever touch it. The hidden place on which no one has placed a hand. The place that does not know how to ask.
I'll take a shot at it.
Please. I can hear you because I'm sitting across the room from you. Can anybody else hear her? No.
No, it's off. I see her face.
How's that?
We can see you now and hear you now.
Yeah. We might have some
It's all right.
problems here. I was just thinking about the place that nobody's ever touched is like our reading the Torah every year. We read the same words, read the same stories over and over again. And every so often you pick out something and you say, I've never seen that before. I never thought about that before. I never noticed that word. I never thought about what it meant. And maybe that's that place that we could touch that at that point, and it would mean something to us. We would learn something from it. It's the mezuzah that is sort of right there, but not visible to us.
Aha. A place that's a kind of disembodied place. Yeah. God is in this place, but I didn't know it, as Jacob says when he wakes up from his dream. When I think about this, and part of the reason that I brought you this poem is because it feels to me like knocking on the door. This is one of Rosh Hashanah and especially Yom Kippur have special associations with doors and knocking upon the door, wouldn't you say? To knock upon the door in repentance, to want something to change, to ask God to change it. Is there a place on the door? Dofek b'teshuvah, one of the liturgical poems says, knocking upon it in teshuvah, in repentance. Does it strike you that there might be a spot that, wow, nobody's ever asked about teshuvah and about repentance in this particular way? This part of the door has never been knocked upon before, and maybe it therefore doesn't know how to respond. Can you figure out how to ask it something to which it will respond, and to which it will respond with immediacy because it's coming right out of your life? It feels to me like that's part of the life of this poem. And that's why it has this image of Hamakom she'enenu yodea lish'ol, the place that doesn't know how to ask even. It doesn't even, this place doesn't even know how to be part of the conversation until it gets knocked upon. I wonder whether you have ever been knocked upon in some new way, that you have, well, there's a part of you that's been accessed that hasn't ever been accessed before. I can tell you on behalf of Sabina and myself that it's definitely true. We've been talking about issues that are going on with certain family members that, oh, you know what, I never considered it from this point of view before, or that point of view. I feel like I'm being accessed by this trouble, by this concern, by this plea, by this lament, by this anxiety, by this presence that's never caught my attention before. Why? Because nobody's ever asked that question before. Nobody's ever tried to knock right there. Does that open anything in you? I mean, it would be nice to know whether it does, whether you feel like sharing it is a different matter. But does it feel familiar? Oh yes, this is something brand new that's never been asked before of me. Susan.
I'm going to have a hard time trying to find the words to explain what I've been thinking. But when you first mentioned the correlation between God and this place, all of us, we are told or believe that we have some part of God within us. And perhaps some of us or all of us have no idea what that part of God is that is in us. And when you ask the question of have we ever been changed by something, I think of when I first started to meditate. I had never done that before. And after learning it for a while, there came a time when I was able, and this is where I have a hard time finding the words, where I was able to understand accessing something that I had never accessed before. And whether that was God or some divine presence or it was external, but I think that I internalized it. Whether it was that part of the place within me that was God, I don't know. But I understand this is rambling, but this is what I was thinking about.
Thank you. I don't think it's rambling at all. I think it's where any of us would be if we were trying to articulate just what you're trying to articulate right now. And it feels exactly right. And in some ways, it feels like that's why Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur require 10 days, I think, by the way, it's a mistake to feel like, well, after only 1 year, we've got it all solved. All that stuff is now solved. No, these things run in cycles. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that it's 7 years or 10 years. Don't disappoint yourself by saying, oh no, the whole year has passed, Yom Kippur has passed, and I haven't figured it out since last Yom Kippur. No, it might take 7 years. It might take 10 years, but we're working. And something is being accessed. And we didn't know that it could even be accessed because maybe we didn't even know it was there. And it is nevertheless ha-makom, the place. It's God after all. And that it beautifully said, Susan, and perplexing, and it doesn't make perfect sense to us. But then again, our images and our imagination are like that. They make sense and we understand them and we can taste them, but we can't necessarily think our way through them because we didn't think our way through the first part. We didn't think our way into it, therefore we can't think our way out of it. We have to feel our way out of it. And this is part of the feeling our way out of it. Well, so far, we've looked at Elazar HaKapar, who stands and who mediates between in and out on behalf of his students and reminding himself and animates the doorway like himself. And then we got into Rivka Miriam, where the whole idea is, can you be opened? Can you be opened? And in some ways entered into because of what is knocked upon and what is presented to you through the knocking. Are you available, especially to the place inside you that's never been inquired of before, like the child who doesn't know how to ask? And now we'll go, just in the last couple of minutes that we have, to the third piece, which is a fragment of a poem by Yehuda Amichai, which takes us from Elazar HaKapar standing at the door and through us standing and knocking into Shuvah and knocking for repentance and hoping to be opened and accessed, even the parts of us that have never been opened and accessed before. Even deeper still, to see that our own personal experiences have to do really with God in the world, at least according to the poet Yehuda Amichai. Aval derech hapetza b'chazi, but through the wound in my chest, metzitz Elohim latevel, God peeks into the world, and it should be Peeks, into the world. But I kind of like the mistake. Yeah, it should be God peeks into the world. Ani hadelet b'dirato, I am the door of his dwelling. That is a really interesting idea that we will certainly take up the next time that we meet, because I think the next time we meet, we'll spend some time setting ourselves up with an appreciation of Elijah the prophet, who is the icon, really, the patron saint of the doorway, and if there's such a thing in Judaism. And to say, I am the door of his dwelling, means that God dwells, I want to say it means that God dwells inside. And the chest is opened by a wound that comes because we have seen friends or colleagues or community members, certainly known and unknown, die of COVID, because we have visited the Vietnam War wall, because we have read about a tragedy in our community, because we've responded to the need of someone in some family that's in an inner circle of closeness to us. There's a wound in my chest, and God peeks into the world through it, because I am the door of his dwelling. I am the door of God's dwelling. I am the door of God's dwelling. God dwells within me. Does that make you feel, I wonder whether that makes you feel any kind of responsibility of which you are not, I don't know, you're not used to it. Or makes you think differently about your responsibility. If I want to animate the door, in some ways like Elazar HaKapar at the beginning, I want to say, this is the way that God gets into the world. And can God get into the world by accessing, by knocking on me? Well, if I'm not used to hearing it, maybe not. But if I make myself open and accessible, maybe so. Ani hadelet b'dirato. I am the door of his dwelling. Pardon the pronouns, but it's hard to get sometimes beyond the pronouns. I am the door of God's dwelling. Do you know what? I say this almost in closing because I know the hour has arrived. It makes me want to go to synagogue. Not because God knows everything and I'm going to learn something that's indispensable for living into and through the next week. Not because of that, but because God needs me to be in the synagogue. If I animate God as fully as Elazar HaKapar wants to animate the doorway, I want to animate God. And I want to say, without me and my experience opened up and frankly told, honestly presented, God can't get into the world. If I'm deeply wounded by an issue, social, cultural, or political, something that's happening next door or around the world, something that's going on in the land of Israel or some other place where there is an abuser and an abused, perhaps, I'm the door. So it may be that that this is a motivation for coming to Shul. I got to come because without me, it's not going to happen. This particular place might not be accessed. Might not be accessed. So the next time Rabbi Sager gives a drasha, gives a sermon in the synagogue, or Rabbi dinner for that matter, maybe we'll think about it. maybe we'll think about what there is that I can perhaps, I hear it knocking. Opportunity knocks, sometimes from the outside, sometimes from the inside. Well, I think we'll call an end to this one for this evening.
Thank you, Rabbi Sager.
You are so
Thank you, Rabbi
welcome.
Sager.
My pleasure. I look forward.
Thank you, Rabbi Sager.
It's my
It's-
pleasure.
I have to say on the last one, I kind of wonder if I'm hurt, whether I'm going to be able to access the world as well as when I'm more at peace.
Are you more potent and better when you're hurt?
Hmm.
Yeah, is that a part that needs to come to Shul more? That
That's
needs
what,
to
that's
be
what's
open.
that when you're hurt, when I'm hurt, I generally come to synagogue less. It's when I'm feeling well and I can share myself is when I come to synagogue.
Yeah, but maybe,
Otherwise I watch it at home.
Has to be the other way around.
and maybe the other way around is good. It's something for all of us to keep in mind.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
And
Well,
it is-
again, thank you. If you want to carry on the conversation with me, you can send me an email. Somebody at the TBO can give you that email,
Absolutely.
and I will definitely respond to you. All right.
And when is your next lecture?
I don't
So,
remember.
so the next scheduled thing we have is on a Shabbat morning in February. We haven't spoken about the specific details. Rabbi Sager, we had talked maybe about a January one too, so we can figure out exactly what that will look like. So stay tuned for the coming months, and we will
Great.
certainly make sure that the PR goes out in enough time. And thank you all for being here tonight. And I will see you all in the coming days and weeks, perhaps in the doors of the temple or in the doors of Zoom.
Now, I might have to go back, but I want to let you know, Rabbi Sager, I saw this on Lucy Dina's, she made an announcement of this and I saw it and signed up. I think I missed it on the connections. I sometimes think those weekly connections are almost too dense now. Something like this for adults. It might be nice almost to have it as a separate announcement so that you get more people.
I appreciate that. And I will certainly pass that feedback along. I know we try really hard to not send too many emails, and that's why we have the weekly one with it all in one place. It was also in Temple Topics, which perhaps is not an incredibly helpful other avenue, but I will pass that along and see. But it has definitely been out there in the world. So
I'll just mention that because
Thanks.
something as special as this and as privileged as this, I think a separate email would be all right. And I saw this in Facebook. If it wasn't on Facebook, I would have missed it, unfortunately.
Glad
would've
you're here.
I'm glad I came through. Thank you.
Great. You're welcome.
Thank you, Rabbi.